Hey guys, how are you? I am here with my great friends, Natalie and Heidi from Buddy Your Macros, and we're doing a joint podcast today, right, guys?
Yay!
So happy to see you, Lindsay. It's been a long time.
I
Yep.
know. I was actually trying to figure out how we met, and I couldn't actually remember.
Oh my gosh.
That is a very good question.
I mean,
it,
we have been together in person to dinner, which is wonderful.
That's
We
true.
That
have,
is
and
true.
I feel
But
like
that
I
was
need to
also
come
like
down.
pre-pandemic, maybe? Was that
Oh,
even
for
like
sure.
It
pre-pandemic?
was.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I
yeah.
actually remember. It was in 2019, I believe.
oh my gosh, that
Yeah,
was like 5 years
it's
ago.
It
almost
does feel
5 years ago.
longer. Yeah, like I feel like quarantine adds like an extra 4 or 5 years to every
Yeah,
memory you have before.
I know. I
it
think
totally
if
does.
I had to like go try to like filter back to think about like how we like officially met, I think it was just because we were in the very beginning. I mean, people will refer to all of us, and you included, like as OGs in this like kind of
Yeah,
space, especially
for
with
sure.
macro counting. So I think back then the community was really, really small, and you kind
Yep.
of just knew everybody who was playing in it.
Yeah.
Now I probably don't even know like 70% of the macro coaches out there,
Oh,
but
for
there
sure.
definitely is like fondness for the people who are like the pioneers when like we're really excited about like unflavored protein powder. Like that was like like collagen wasn't even a thing back then. So I
Right.
mean,
Everything is so different. I always tell people I started macro counting before there were even apps. Like I had books,
Yeah.
like notebooks. And do you guys
oh my
remember
gosh.
Calorie King? Like it was a
Oh,
website for a
totally.
while.
Yes.
But that's where I
Yep.
found everything. Was on Calorie King. I was like a
Oh
half
my
cup of
gosh.
oats. I mean, of course you can look at the labels and stuff, but
And they
like
had like
Calorie
the
King.
thick little book.
Book, yes, the
Yes.
Yes.
pocketbook that you could
Yeah.
take with
Yeah,
you.
totally. No apps, no nothing. Oh my gosh. Totally
So
OG.
I want to actually ask you a question before we dive into the podcast.
Yeah.
When you like look back and reflect back, I mean, from your show days aside though, because I think that like that is completely a
Okay.
category of its own
Normal
as
life.
far as like
Yeah.
practices and things like that, just like regular normal life. Do you think when you look back where you're like, I could see why people think that I was a little disordered then, or some of the practices that we used to like teach people, like that might have been a little extreme, like when you reflect back, like
Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
Same.
Even not competing. Like sometimes I repurpose content and I'll scroll back years just for like ideas from my past content. I'm like, I can't believe I could never get away with posting that anymore.
Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, and I think in some ways it's changed for the better, but like
Yes.
I can't be too hard on myself because we were so like I honestly felt like we were breaking a code. Like when we were like there was a time we were like pocket scales, like bring a pocket scale with you so
I
you can
love
make
that.
sure that you're yeah, yeah. And the reason we did that is because we were like, how many Chick-fil-A French fries
Right.
are in a medium? Do you know what I mean? Like it was
Yes.
just like the accuracy and the fever pitch
Right.
of like
But
we
I
can
feel
figure
like
out
sometimes
everything.
and for the
yes.
record, you can have about 15 fries,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
eight in
That's
a
hilarious.
small,
Chick-fil-A
16 in a large.
though, so they're big waffle
Chick-fil-A.
fries. Yes, for
Right.
Yes.
So you actually
Yeah.
only get eight in a small, which is super a total devastation. That
yes.
Yes.
makes sense. But I mean,
I
yeah,
feel
it was like
like we had to have
big.
like a very extreme end, because you come from not tracking at all, which is like one end, and then you start
Yeah.
tracking, and it's like you go to the other extreme before you can find that balance in the middle.
Yep. Which is sort of a microcosm of my entire personality.
Is
It
it?
just has to go extreme, and then we kind of come settle right back in the
Right.
middle.
I think
I
it's
feel
actually
like
perfect because
everyone
of
has
the
to do
topic
it.
we're yeah, and I think it's perfect because like the topic we're like diving into today. We're going to chat about like struggles and maintenance, and I think
Mhm.
it's so funny because part of us who have seen so many different women come through these type of programs and have having had coached them too. It's like you can see how like there are some really extreme practices and behaviors you have to do when you're in a deficit, and so to make this belief that you have to live this way in maintenance is really unfair. But at the same time, you also can't do none of them, right?
Totally.
To maintain a result that you achieved with that kind of extremeness. And so I think it'll be interesting to chat about that today and see even how like maybe our views have changed on maintenance over the years and like what that even like means to us anymore and what it might mean to like somebody who is like fresh out of their very first you're so adorable cut that you've ever done counting macros. Like
Right.
I miss those days when you're like, oh, it was so magical, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
seriously.
tell me about your guys' personal journeys. Like, do you live mostly at maintenance? I mean, I know the answer, but let's kind of talk about it for audiences and stuff.
Yeah, definitely in maintenance.
Mhm.
I it's been a couple years at least, hasn't it, since we cut last. Mostly in maintenance
You say
and
we
like
like you guys are one person.
I know it's
We
true.
kind of are. I
It's
mean,
kind of true.
it's really ridiculous. Like we really could not cut separate from one another. It would just
Really?
completely change the dynamic of our relationship in the sense of like, what do you mean we're not going to get donuts? Okay, fine. Like it just seems almost like if we're gonna do it, it's kind of like when you have tell people to get their like husbands or partners on
Yes.
board with what they're
Yes.
doing. It's kind of like it has to kind of be like a I'm so sorry I'm going to do this to you, but can we
Yeah.
do this
I
together
need to
kind of
go
thing?
into a fat loss phase. So you ready?
Yeah.
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 And it's also better with a friend too. I mean, let's be
Totally.
completely honest. I mean, that is
Yeah.
definitely a strategy that we encourage. But I think the last time we really truly cut was probably 2020.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's a little bit like the what we were just talking about. So it was pretty extreme, definitely the leanest I ever got. And it was intense. I kind of came I mean, now I'm like I don't want to speak for both of us, but like both of us kind of came out of that experience um like not excited to do it again,
Yeah. What
and
was so
really
extreme about it? What made you feel that way?
For me, cutting brings up a lot of so it was sort of like a what's a lot of situations combining in my
Okay.
personal life,
Mhm.
in and then just being like I think I saw some meme that was called an ADHD prove mode, where it's like the harder things get, the harder I dig in. And I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not pulling the plug on this. Like, I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
And I actually ended up having a couple panic attacks and was like, yeah, we need to bring some moderation into this whole
Yeah.
process. But again, like I don't know that's obviously not a typical experience for everyone, but I think the big lesson that I came out of that with is that there are times and seasons, and to be careful to not lose the vision of like if you're going through a fat loss phase, the idea would be to improve your life in some way, not to
Mhm.
burn your life down in the name of a specific aesthetic result, right? I
Yeah.
think I had in my mind I just wanted to prove that I could do it, and I just wasn't going to let anything get in the way. Unfortunately, including my mental health a little bit,
Yeah.
right?
And just that
So
kind of
yeah,
prove it is kind of a negative attitude, right?
yeah,
Yeah, like prove it to
absolutely,
myself, prove myself wrong, or prove somebody else wrong. Like there's got to be more of a positive. And I've been the same way, where it's like
yeah.
prove it to everybody else I can do this, or prove it to myself I can do this.
Yeah, and it's like it's crazy because even knowing some of the common mindset. I mean, I've been a coach for several years at that
Yeah.
point. Like knowing how destructive like shoulds and ignoring your needs can be. I knew that stuff, but somehow I was like, oh, that's because I know it. I can't possibly be violating those
Right.
things, and it's like I,
Or I have like a fail safe that it's just not going to happen to me
yeah,
because I already have an awareness, which is what half the problem is, right? Like they don't have an awareness of like their emotions and their needs and things like that. But it's amazing how you can just disregard all that, even if you know it.
it's kind of like the Jerry Seinfeld thing where he's like, "Don't drink cough syrup while you're operating heavy machinery," but how people are like, "That's for people who don't know what they're doing. I'm an
Right.
expert,"
Yes, yes, yes.
That's
Well,
kind
and
of
then
what
it
I'm
also
doing.
helps us relate to our clients too, though, because you're like, oh,
Yeah,
we are actually exactly the same when I'm put in this situation, just like you guys are.
totally.
100%. And then, it was interesting. This was actually our very first coach led cut from like a person who actually like set up everything from our workouts to like
Yeah,
every single
that's
detail
kind
was
of fun, though,
managed.
right? Hiring a
It
coach
Yeah,
was, and we
way
got,
more.
and to be honest, Heidi got like the leanest she ever got. I actually was in a position to think like, okay, finally, this is it. Like I'm gonna have this transformation that I've always wanted. Like I have the work ethic for it. Like let's just go full send on it. And it actually ended up being probably one of the most like, I mean, not to be like all dramatic, but if I think about it, it was kind of traumatizing actually because
Hmm.
I had to like face a lot of things that like I didn't think that I would have had to because I was like, well, I by all intents and purposes this should work, right? Like I mean, at one point it was like 19,000 steps, 5 days of strength training, 1,100 calories. I'm like, this should get me to this place of leanness
Oh my
that
gosh.
like I'm ready for, that
right.
I've strength trained for, like I've done enough successful cuts, like I know how macros work, like I'm
Yeah.
really proficient at it, and like it didn't actually yield that, and it ended up putting me like in a probably in the first time in my life a really disordered headspace, which
Mhm.
I also feel grateful for because I can see how women get there. I think before I
Yeah.
was like, that's crazy, like why would that do that? And then I found myself like sleeping so I wouldn't have to eat, or like drinking tons of caffeine so I wouldn't be hungry. I mean, 1,100 calories over a span of a day doesn't go very far. And so there
Totally.
were some of these practices, and then I also didn't get the result that I thought I would get to, which
Yeah.
also felt really like unfulfilling and it was actually pretty depressing when I think about it. So that has also made me a little bit gun shy from like really going full send into a cut again because I worry about kind of retracing those kind of steps, as well as like my expectations and even just like my mindset about how I felt then. It's interesting because I think most people think that, oh, I know how to do this, but like I'm sure, and you can attest to this, like not every cut is the same. In fact,
Yeah.
No,
very few
not
of
at
them
all.
are exactly identical. Like every single time you go
Yep.
into a deficit phase, it's completely different than the last. And I
Yes.
think the same thing goes for maintenance too. Like you might have had a really successful maintenance phase. Like we were able to maintain after our very first cuts in in what 2013 for probably a year or two.
I think it was
To
2016 maybe or
or
something
when
like
was
that.
Fan born? I can't even
Yeah, I
remember.
know.
2016. Sorry, 2016. Like we maintained, like that's when we started CrossFit. That we didn't have to cut for like 2 years.
Yeah.
Like scale weight didn't really change.
That's amazing.
It was all beautiful, and so that was that. But then you do maintenance after a couple cuts, and you're like, oh wow,
It's much
you can
harder.
fly on real fast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So you guys have
And
been
how
in
are you?
maintenance since like 2020, right? Yeah, I've kind of been the same situation. So, I mean, I know you guys know this and my audience does, but for your audience, I've competed for a long time from like 2009 to 2018, off and on, not every single year, but in 2018, I ended up with a lot of hormone issues from staying way too lean for too long, and then ended up gaining 50 pounds the year following that. And that's actually when I went down there with you guys, was kind of just right in the middle, is when I visited you and down by your house. What am I trying to say? Down in California,
Yeah.
down in your house when we went to dinner. And so I was able to lose that weight, and I haven't really done a cut since then. So I lost, obviously I didn't lose the whole 50 because it was from a stage weight to a high weight, but I lost about 25 to 30 pounds of it. And it took about 3 cycles. And I really think that the fact that I did it in like 10-pound chunks and then took about 6 months at maintenance in between is why I've been able to successfully maintain it. Because I literally did like a 12 to 14 week cut, lost about 8 to 10 pounds, maintained it for 6 months. And of course, we'll go into more about maintenance, but part of maintenance is some scale fluctuations. And sometimes you gain 5 pounds in maintenance and you want to do a little mini cut. To me, that's all still maintenance. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you gain a little bit, then you tighten things up for a little bit. It's kind of just that fluctuation. And I feel like a lot of people, one hard thing about maintenance is people think that they have to maintain that exact number or even within like 2 pounds. And that's not very realistic. You're going to have life for example, in December, I went to Arizona with my coaching team and we ate at so many good restaurants. And then I came home like 5 days later, I went to Las Vegas, and then we had the holidays, and then I went on a cruise. And like 6 weeks later, I'm up 5 pounds and I want to just tighten things up a little bit. I don't see that as weight gain and then going into a cut. To me, that's all still just the fluctuations of maintenance. Do you agree?
I totally agree.
Well,
Yeah.
especially if a lot of times like that kind of thing can be like mitigated with like, oh, I don't know, maybe having some water and maybe
Yes.
some fiber and like getting
Right.
a few steps, right? I think that like when you can kind of, if you use your term tighten it up a little bit, like just kind of getting back to your healthy habits, if you can
Yep.
notice like a couple pounds shake out, just not even being in a deficit, but just like
Yeah.
visiting the things like sleeping good again, actually getting regular sleep or reducing your stress. And if the scale
Tracking,
if the scale can shake out that way, that means to me that you are in a maintenance phase. Like that's not like I cut and I like lost these 2 pounds.
Yes,
I
exactly. I
agree with
agree.
you. It's like this is just and also if I love that Heidi did this one day. Like she weighed herself in the morning and weighed herself at night. It's like that fluctuation even in a day is
Yeah.
going to be anywhere from like 2 to 4 or 5 pounds. So if you don't honor that as maintenance, then what is it? Right?
Because that post, I had my bare feet on the scale and I
Uh-huh.
had like terrible bunions, and by far and away, people will be more concerned about that.
Yeah. You're like, you're missing the message.
But the point remains.
We should repost that. Like, don't worry about the bunions; they're fine.
Yeah.
I'm addressing it. Okay.
Right. Caution. That is so funny. So I haven't done like a true cut since 2021, with the exception of like just little phases, just little fluctuations. Yeah. But why don't we?
Just for clarity's sake with the reader, like when we say tighten it up, that we're not talking about going into a cut. We're talking about like being more accurate with your numbers and getting back into like routines and things like that.
And more intentional.
Exactly.
Intentional about your food choices in the sense of like, trust me, when you're on a cruise or you're out with your team or you're out with your friends or the holidays, most of us aren't even paying attention at all to anything. It's strictly by feel, festivity, fun. Right? So like in my mind, air quote, tighten it up is like, hey, I actually am like, what do I want to eat today? Is that a choice that will actually make me feel satisfied?
Yes.
Does that actually maybe like help with my digestive system? did I have some water today? Like
Yeah.
paying
Yep.
attention as far as like to
Right.
the things that are like good
Yeah.
habits.
So
And do you
sorry,
guys
you were
track?
saying.
Yeah, no, do you track when you're at maintenance?
Yeah, it's they say it's a perishable skill, right? Like
Mhm.
if you aren't tracking, like your estimations can get rather
Oh,
generous.
for sure.
Um,
For sure.
but I also don't think that depending on what do we always say? Like the more specific of the result you want, the more specific your behavior has to be. So the
Mhm.
more narrow your expectation of what you are maintaining, then the
Mhm.
more specific your behavior has to be. Like I'm I'm pretty comfortable with scale fluctuations, so
Yeah.
I probably track like 3 or 4 days, but there's also been months where I haven't tracked really at all, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of times and seasons as it were. But I do
Yeah.
think it's crazy to be in maintenance and have the expectation of maintaining and not doing any of the behaviors, like not
Yes.
doing any self-monitoring, right?
Right.
Because I mean, you and I both, we all know here that like your body fat set point and whatnot will like cue you back to where you were before. It's very subconscious. So
Right.
just like you can know something like, oh, having 10 out of 10 anxiety is not good for you and you can still push yourself there.
Right.
You got to keep your eye on yourself.
Yeah, yeah,
And
for sure. And there's different ways of monitoring too. Like, just because you're monitoring your calorie intake doesn't necessarily mean you're in your tracking app adding up every little thing. Something I do
yeah,
is I take a break from tracking, but I mentally know where my maintenance calories are and I think, okay, I need 4 meals of 500 calories or whatever it is,
Mhm.
and I'll look at my meal and I'll be like, okay, yep, this is approximately 500 calories or whatever I want it to be. And so I'm not tracking, but I have that education from like, okay, 100 calories of
Yes.
this, 200 of this, whatever. Okay, that's a good meal for me.
Or like just track your protein.
Yes.
If you're hitting 130 grams of protein or 150 or whatever, you're not that will help regulate your appetite
Yeah.
in a lot of ways that can compensate for not necessarily tracking super
Totally.
accurately.
And the likelihood of if you're eating 130 to 150 grams of protein, it's less likely that you're just going off the rails with other
Right. With
things, right?
chocolate cake.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's a ton of food. Like if you're eating whatever you want and you're managing to nail 150 grams of protein, you are having a massive amount of food, right?
Yes.
totally.
Like, I
Yeah.
mean, as we know how challenging it can be to get even 100 grams of protein in sometimes,
Hmm.
right? So I think contextually, like it gives you a better idea of like where am I landing, and also just kind of a practice of remembering like portion control and portion size. I think is just for knowledge and context because it's
Yep.
really easy just to be like, once again with like a small fry for 8 at Chick-fil-A, it's really easy to make that 10 or 12 or
Yeah.
14 and forget that you had, two small servings of French fries versus, one.
Well,
For
totally.
sure.
And like in fairness, while this might, maybe to some people this sounds extreme, but it's also we're in a food landscape that is also very extreme. The portion sizing at restaurants or the expectation our eyeballs have of how much food we should have. I mean, you've seen the statistics about like the size of like a value meal and how that's
Hmm.
exponentially grown over the past 20 years. So I think it's just about being informed, right? Because if we're gonna there's actually, I would say we agree with most of the principles of intuitive eating,
Hmm.
but we're not in a, it's not fair,
Right. We're
right?
being
Like some of
bombarded
these
everywhere. Yeah.
exactly. Some of these foods have been scientifically altered to make them more palatable. And
Hmm.
then on top of the fact that like our brains just really enjoy fat and carbs.
Right. For sure. So that this is like leading right into our topic. Our topic that we want to talk about is pitfalls in maintenance, why you're
Yeah.
struggling with maintaining your weight. So I know Nat and Heidi, you guys have a good like a bullet point, some bullet points here. So why don't we just jump on into those?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think probably our number one would be that you're looking for the pings of the scale for validation. And I
Yeah.
think we have been conditioned to believe that the scale tells us kind of how to feel. Like, tell me, scale, how do I get to feel about myself today? Like, you step on the scale, we all know the feeling of like when it's down, we're like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, you feel
Yes.
like,
Validates your decisions.
yeah,
All
right.
Right.
yeah.
We'll
And
wear a different
it's
outfit than if
legitimately
it was up.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's like a legitimate, real dopamine dump, right? Because it shows it, in us too. It says like you're doing a good job, right? And who
Yeah.
doesn't love a gold star, right? And then
Hmm.
on the flip side, you also know the feeling of stepping on the scale and it's up, or you're like, that can't be possible. How is it that high? Or like,
Hmm.
when did this happen? Kind of thing, right? And then
Yeah.
automatically you start questioning and second guessing yourself, like, what have I been doing? Or like, oh, I knew I ate too much, or I knew I shouldn't have done that, or I know that I shouldn't have. Like, we constantly start just like judging ourselves. And so
Hmm.
when you use the pings of the scale for validation, it's really hard to not equate like that number with like worth or success or reward or punishment or meeting goals and like a million other emotions. And so
Yeah.
it's hard because when you remove that part where the scale actually becomes more of a way to monitor your maintenance than it is about like seeing a downward trend, or if you're in a like build an upward trend, but like kind of neutralizing it to be like, actually, this is just a data point for us to see how we're doing. It's kind of less fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And weighing yourself responsibly, right? Like the post you mentioned earlier, you weigh yourself, I'm sure your audience already knows this, but you weigh yourself first thing in the morning before you eat or drink, but after you use the restroom, and then you take an average of those weights over the week, and that's
Yeah.
your most accurate weight.
Yes, I like that
Yeah.
you mentioned that because so many people are hung up on that day-to-day scale and they try to say,
Mhm.
there's a big thing right now like you should only do weekly weigh-ins or even less often. In my mind, the downside of that though is if you're constantly catching that up
Yeah,
fluctuation, that upswing, you're going to have some problems with one, not knowing if your cut or whatever you're working on is working. But if you can't handle a daily scale reading, I almost think the bigger problem is working on your relationship with the scale, you know?
totally.
100%.
Yeah.
Totally.
We would emphatically agree with that. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it's like, especially like, what is the day? Like, if for those of you who had like a Super Bowl party last night,
Mhm.
you stepping on the scale this morning as your one weigh-in for the week is probably not
Yes.
going to be reflective of what it is, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's interesting. My son is actually in a deficit phase, and he just like every single day, I'm like, did you weigh yourself? Did you, after you went to the bathroom, were you like butt naked on the scale? And like half the time, he's like, I just weigh myself after practice. I'm like, okay, like don't even do that.
But
Like you're
yeah,
just
you
kind of
can't even use
wasting.
that as a
Yeah,
data.
it's like
Yeah.
kind of completely null and void, and then you either think it's working or you don't think it's working. And it's been
Right.
interesting taking somebody who has no context for really weighing themselves to collect data, how it's
Right.
like you have to do it this way. And so it's funny, it made me realize that like this is why I think a lot of people struggle with their weight loss is because they actually don't do it correctly.
Yes.
They
Yeah,
are just
for
like,
sure.
I'm just gonna weigh myself today on a whim and see if it's working. And then like depending on the day or whatever you had or whatever time of day, or if you're, I don't know, fully dressed after baseball practice for 2.5 hours and weight room and have eating like 3 meals, you're gonna weigh yourself and like think that this is gonna give me some really good information.
Well, totally.
Right.
And then you're putting
But like,
too much stock into that one number too.
yes.
It's like you're
Yes.
putting the value of is what I'm doing working into just
Mhm.
this one weigh-in as opposed to multiple data markers and taking that average.
Yeah.
I love that you said that.
Well, totally. I mean, and we've all seen the scale in like the gym bathroom. So
Yes.
it's not like this idea comes from nowhere, right? Like
Right.
even like a fitness authority, if you will, is saying like,
Mhm.
sure, weigh yourself here in the gym bathroom
Yeah.
with
Right.
your
With your
clothes
tennis shoes
on,
Next to the sauna.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. But that like, yeah, just being honoring your goal by doing the process in like a kind of a responsible way,
Well, and even
right?
Yeah.
with
I
measurements
love that.
too, right? Like I'm like Baz, like let's make sure we're taking some measurements too, because especially if you are in a weight room, it's going to maybe be different.
Yeah.
And like he's like,
Like
why would I care about my weight? Like he's like, why would I care about my waist measurement? And I'm like, because it's another data point,
Yes.
versus the scale. And so kind of like validation of things to the scale, like you, especially if you're strength training women, which hopefully 99.9% of you are,
Yeah.
that scale is not going to give you enough context for what you're doing, especially in maintenance.
yeah, because even having a hard workout can make the scale go up. Like there are lots of things that you could be doing that are positive that cause scale fluctuations. So just
Yeah.
an average is better. And I totally agree with you, Lindsay. Like if I had my druthers, I'd rather have somebody weigh themselves every day, take 5 seconds to do it, not worry about it too much, than
Yep.
weigh themselves like once a week or every other week, and then all of the pressure
Get
comes
so
down to like what
emotionally
that
attached to
says.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's just that one data point, you make that mean way more than it needs to. Yeah.
totally,
Okay. So that's
totally.
mistake number one
Hey,
is, being used to
too
the
much.
ups and downs. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So number two, you've never eaten so much on purpose.
Yes. Yeah.
It
I
can
mean,
be
how many women
very
do you talk to that are like, I've eaten 1,200 calories for the last 10 years?
yes. I started Weight Watchers when I was
Yeah,
11,
and then
and like
when they
Right.
eat
Oh,
more
that's
than
sad.
that, they're like, "Oh, well, I ate too much today." And I mean, and I know you know this too from when you collect women's initial like intake data. Like, so many of them are like, "I probably eat like 2,700 calories," and you're like, "Well, did you track that?" Well, no, but I just eat a lot. And you're like, "So you have no idea why you came up with that calorie balance. Your just assumption is like it's got to be over 2,000 for sure, for
yeah,
sure,
Yeah.
like if
right?"
you don't have the body you want because you eat too much, which is ironically not not necessarily true. Like
Not
not
necessarily,
eating
for
enough can
sure.
cause just as many problems with weight maintenance as eating too
Yeah.
much.
And not eating the right, not getting enough protein, all the things, so many
Yep.
issues. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been conditioned to eat less, and this also can play into like the scale games, because the weighing yourself games, because when you're eating more food, there's literally more, like, food weighs something. There's
Yes,
more food
in your
weight
gut,
in your
right.
system.
Yes.
Exactly. But yeah, that eating more can be a very freeing process, and also I think a lot of women bring their deficit mentality, or like, eating high volume foods or whatever to
Mhm.
stay full. They bring those into maintenance,
That makes it
where
harder. Yeah.
yeah, some women really do. It is actually a challenge to eat that much. So making sure that you are taking advantage of the higher calories in maintenance by incorporating foods that are more calorie dense, that
Yeah.
they can be healthy foods, they can be enjoyable foods, they can be all of it, but really like widening that landscape for yourself, because it
Mhm.
can get pretty narrow in a deficit, whether you're trying to simplify tracking by eating a lot of the same things, or you're just eating a lot of high volume foods so that you can be successful in a
Yeah.
deficit, but making sure to switch that up in maintenance.
I feel like stemming from that too is people kind of miss the feeling of always feeling quote unquote skinny or
Or
lean
lean,
or
yeah,
waking
like
up
super lean.
hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, that's not real life. Real life is
Yeah.
not meant to be always hungry or always having like always feeling skinny, like you're going to have times where you're full. You're going to have times where your pants are fitting just fine. Like of course we don't want your clothes to get all tight, but you're not going to always feel skinny, lean,
That's such a
hungry.
great point. It's like there's something so like masochistic about being like, I feel so good when I'm starving.
Yeah.
It's like you've obviously never really truly been starving, because if you are, most people who
Right.
have like will tell you that it's not a good feeling,
No, it
right?
does not feel
But
good.
but I also can see how, like, if you really have no context for the science and an understanding on how the way calories work and your body works, like it would feel counterintuitive to eat more when you've always been told that eating less gets you the body you want. So
Yes.
why would eating more allow me to have the body I want? Like nothing has ever proved that outside of like science, right? Like if you didn't know anything about it, you'd be like, that makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
it seems silly, right? It's like
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
people are like, you need to spend money to make money. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. It's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome. Okay.
Okay. So number 3.
You have no goals outside of weight loss. So it's like if your New Year's resolution or every goal you've ever had for yourself is reduced to like, I just want to weigh less all the time, then
Mhm.
that's literally all you have to look forward to as far as something that you're trying to chase or something that you want for yourself, right? And I
Yeah.
think that what's interesting is that a lot of people use that as the stepping stone to be able to have another goal. Like when I lose weight, I can do this. Or
Then
when
I'll
I
start
finally get
focusing
to
on this.
this pant size, I can do this. Or I'm not going to like we hear it's like I'm not going to chop my hair off until like I weigh this much, or I'm not going to
Mhm.
go take on dancing or salsa or whatever until I get thin enough to like be in this or whatever, and I'm not
Mhm.
going to surf. Or I mean, we use weight loss as like the gateway goal
To
accomplishment to
other
be able to
things.
do other
Yeah.
things. Yeah, and
Totally.
so like I think there's this like horrible like this realization you have to come that you actually can't chase weight loss year round successfully. So if
Mhm.
you're literally just waiting from one weight loss phase to another in order to be able to accomplish something, then yeah, you're gonna be in a rush to get it. I mean, how many times do we have women who are like, I've been in maintenance for like 3 weeks. When can I cut again? And you're
Right.
like, whoa, like hold on a second. Like we just did like a 3 or 4 month cut. Like
Right.
let's like put some time in maintenance. And I think there's also just like the irony is that most of our life should be spent in maintenance, not a deficit phase. And a
Yeah.
lot of people just believe like my life is like one deficit phase to another, and maintenance is just like a waiting ground where I have to like sit like
Yeah.
impatiently
And
checking
it's
my
like
foot
Trying to
wasting
get
until
the
time.
I get it. Yeah.
Right. I think the
Like
big
your
thing
example
there
is such a good one of like the 10 pounds and then the 6 months.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No, I was just going to say we encourage clients to like, not only think of other fitness goals, but maintaining is a goal in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like if you go week
Yep.
by week and you're maintaining, you can switch that in your brain to I am reaching my goals because that is my goal. But we always try and tell clients like, what else do you want to focus on in your life? Like, do you have
Yeah.
business goals? Do you want to do more things with your family? Do you want to, you know, organize rooms in your house? Like that's a great time to take that energy of like setting a goal and reaching a goal to something outside of what you look like, your body, even your health, how you feel. If you're in a
Yep.
maintenance phase, like set other goals outside of your fitness.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, that's amazing advice, because that I think is like, that's such a crucial part of maintaining.
Yes. It's not
If
even
you're
it's not
so overly
maintaining.
focused.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't even think about it. I don't even hardly think
Yep.
about like you don't do like, oh, are my pants fitting? Like I can go days without even like thinking about that kind of stuff in maintenance.
Totally. And adding in that kind of stuff with your into your life is super helpful. I think without realizing it, a lot of women have just normalized a very high
Mhm.
level of stress.
Yep.
And when you're stressed, you go to your most practiced stories. And a lot of us like
Mm.
weight loss is that thing. It feels
It's a
like that
thing.
thing that you can control and you can use it to predict whether or not your life is going to be good or how you're perceived or all of those kinds of things. And none of that is true. And meanwhile, your life is just is passing you by. I'm not saying that fat loss is superficial or wanting to maintain is
Yeah,
superficial,
right.
but like the more pillars you have to base your self-esteem on, the
Mhm.
healthier it is. And so it's just really a great time to diversify. I love that you do that with your clients. It's crucial.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think a great question to ask yourself, like as a listener, it's like if I had gotten to like my goal weight, what would my goals be now? Like if I didn't have to
Mhm.
lose any more weight and I was maintaining this weight that I wanted,
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
would my goals be? And if you can't think of any, then we really need to kind of start digging. And I think, it's interesting, like you don't really understand the value of maintenance until you gained a bunch of weight and you realize like, oh, that would have
That
been way more fun to
yes.
maintain that result than have to go into a cut again to kind of get back there. And so it's
Oh,
like this
totally.
this value of maintenance that people are like, oh, maintenance is whatever or whatever. It's like, no, actually, if you've ever put on 10 to 15 pounds, you understand the value of like
Yep.
hmm
maintenance, right?
And
And
that
so
yeah, I talk about that a lot too because when I was gaining that 50 pounds that year, like it was legitimately almost every week it was a pound up, an inch up, a pound up for a year, like 52
wow.
weeks. It was crazy. And then I remember like towards the end of that when it stopped going up, I was so happy because I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's stopping." Like I was just as happy as if I was losing. So I was like, "Oh, finally it's like you're right. You don't realize how amazing it is to maintain until you're struggling with that."
Totally. I
Mhm.
I completely agree. So good.
Yeah.
Um, okay, number
Okay, yeah,
four.
good. Number 4, let's do it.
Number four, you're impatient to be in a calorie deficit again. So we kind of
Yes.
touched on this, but maintenance is really where you should be
Mhm.
99% of the time. Like what kind of a rule of thumb is like you should be in maintenance for 2 to 3 times as long as you were in a deficit is
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
like a helpful way to think about it. But yeah, just really like if you can get comfortable in maintenance, get comfortable with eating that much, get comfortable with like with having this perspective of instead what can I cut out instead like what can I add
Yeah.
in what how
Mhm.
can I really enjoy my body, my fitness level, being able to enjoy the accomplishment, being proud of yourself, all of that instead of just focusing on um, when can you get into fat loss again, right?
Yes. And I feel like if your maintenance phase is too short, your next fat loss phase, like let's say you are doing a maintenance phase as a buffer between a couple fat loss phases because you have a bigger
yeah,
goal or whatever. If your maintenance phase is too short, all the problems that you had in your previous deficit are going to come right back even sooner. Like if you have to think,
Totally.
why did I come out of a deficit? Okay, maybe I wasn't seeing good progress anymore. My progress had slowed down because your metabolism had adapted. Maybe you're not sleeping as good. Maybe your hunger is really high. Whatever those issues were, if you don't have enough time, like quote unquote, healing outside of that deficit, it's just going to be the same situation, but sooner,
Yep.
right?
100%.
So well said.
And
Yes.
every single time I've ever had a more successful cut, it's because I've had longer stretches of
Yep.
maintenance.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I really truly believe that. I mean, unless you happen to like hit pause and go to maintenance for other things, or you took a more extended diet break or something like that, I really do think that women don't realize that. Like, would you rather do this like up and down yo yo dieting like 4 or 5 times a year attempting a cut, or take a pause and then do one really amazing solid one where you get like the same result instead of being all over the place, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is kind of like the answer to like, my metabolism broken. It's like your metabolism is not broken,
Right.
it's
It's
adapted.
adapted.
And so it's
Yep.
like if you feel like you're always in like a state of that, then like you kind of are right. Like you're so adapted to this low calorie level that you're not even giving yourself time to like recoup and like, be restorative and like go back to homeostasis or whatever you want to call it. But like they kind of miss that step, right?
Yeah.
And then it always is like, why do I have to keep eating lower and lower and lower? Well, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Because you never gave yourself a break. Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. And then the last one we have is you thrive in restriction. So
Yeah.
whether it spares you you know, the decision making, right? Like every day you're faced with a new story problem of like, how do I figure this out? How do I fit?
Mhm.
And then a lot of women, they like that control. They like that,
Yes.
like you were saying, like that dolphin lameness. They
Yep.
like feeling that like it's something that they can control and feel successful at and dominate. And it comes from a very, I feel like, is often correlated with just a bad relationship with your body and wanting to like kind of dominate it and control it,
For sure.
as opposed to feeling like this is my body is not an enemy. we
Hmm.
are we are partners, and I want to take care of the health and really like do things that promote my well-being, instead of like, oh, my body is out to get me, and like you were saying, like it's broken, and I'm going to do this to punish and purify myself to like a leaner version, which is just not a thing.
No, and
As it
it's
turns
yeah,
out.
not a good mentality for sure. And yeah, people do get, I mean, I remember myself feeling like that back in the day. I'm like, well, I had little kids and life just felt so crazy that my nutrition was one thing in my life that I could quote unquote control.
Yeah.
And that's why one of the reasons why I left competing, because I felt like there was so much like hyper control of it. And I controlled what I did and kind of in a sense controlled the outcome, sort of, not really, but that's what I thought at the time. And and that
Oh,
that
oh,
gives
youth,
you
yeah.
that sense of control when everything else feels chaotic, but that's really not
Yeah.
what we should be doing. We should be creating that balance and like getting rid of that chaos in other places.
Yeah, it's crazy that one of the greatest existential fears is a fear of freedom. That seems so counterintuitive, especially as
Interesting.
Americans, but
Yeah,
like freedom should be everything you want, right? But like it can be really, really scary,
Yeah.
especially when you
for
feel like
sure.
food is a minefield and like your body's out to get you, yeah, you're living in a haunted house for
Dude,
sure.
God, that's
Yeah.
such a great way to say it, because it's like that's why people, I think it's so funny. Like we can hear the word food freedom and we're like, oh yeah, why wouldn't you want that? And which is like, oh no, that's way too flexible. I have to have rules, or like I can't have everything be available. But usually
Yep.
that comes down to like your relationship with the food. That is like, oh
Mhm.
no, cake has historically been awful to me. Like I can't have cake or things like that. And I think it's interesting how like I think people use it as like a badge of honor. Like remember how when we were in college, like, oh, I got like 2 hours of sleep and like look how amazing I did and I existed
Yes.
all day long. And people used to be like, oh my gosh, I get like no sleep and like look at me functioning like an amazing person.
Yeah.
Or
People do the
even
same
just like
thing with like,
5 years ago in the fitness industry, right? Like no
Yeah.
days off, hustle. Like that was
oh,
how it was back then.
hey, we
Totally.
need to
Get up
come
at
back and do a
4 o'clock in
whole
the morning
podcast on
and
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
Seriously, but it's like I think people think like, oh, I'm not hungry. Like they think that that's so cool. Like, oh, I
right.
just don't ever have to eat. I'm like, I just go go go. I don't. I like I love when people are like, I haven't. I totally forget to eat all the time, and I'm like, okay.
That's not
Like they think hunger is weakness or something, and it's just
yes.
like, no, that's actually your body's natural cue telling you like, hey, we're gonna die soon, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think
And it's your
it's like
metabolism
people,
working,
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
seriously,
It's your
but they also
metabolism
kind of don't
actually
like that.
being healthy and telling you,
Yeah.
I need more food, right?
Sorry, the irony of that just got me. That's really good.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then also, like, heaven forbid, I don't have one more thing to suppress about myself. I suppress my emotions and my appetite and all
Right.
my awareness about things. And so I think there are women who think that being restrictive is so cool, right? Like,
Yeah.
I am so in tune with my body. I can control it to do whatever I want to do. I don't need to eat anything. Like, it's just, it's a neglect of your needs is really what it
Yeah.
is. And that's a
Yeah.
bummer.
And
Yeah, for sure.
you may not know you're doing that. Like you may not be as aware of, like some people are more aware of their feelings than their thoughts. Like you may not hear yourself think
Yeah.
those things, but it's worth looking at your behavior and like how the process is feeling, because how the process feels determines your results.
Yeah, for
Right? If
sure.
it's miserable, you're gonna get what's that thing you always say? It's not a dream body if it's a
Nightmare
nightmare
to
to
maintain.
maintain.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, that's like, I'm sure you guys do something similar, but in our client check-ins, we ask them to share wins, right? And
Yeah.
it's the clients that are always complaining, they never see as good of results as the ones who are like, even on the weeks they don't see results, but they're pointing out their wins. Like they always have so much better results in the long term if they have a
Yeah.
better attitude. I don't really know
I,
if there's science behind
We
that,
always
but
say, like, if a girl sends her pictures in with a smile on her face, this girl is going to get great results.
yep.
But when they're
oh, I
like,
love that.
ew, yuck, gross,
Or scratch their face
scratch their
out or
face,
put
Yeah.
yeah,
their
I'm
X
like,
over it.
it's like
Yeah.
that limits you to how much success
Yes.
you're going to have because you already think horrible things about yourself. So why would
Right.
you have anything good, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So then when you're thinking about your goals, it will either feel terrible, or you will actively try not to think about your goals, because when you think about them, it feels terrible. Right?
Yes.
So
Uh-huh.
anyways,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. I have one more thing to add. Um, And that has to do with diet mentality. So I feel like one reason people struggle in maintenance is because they still are bringing over some of that diet mentality. And we preach like, when you're in maintenance, you don't have to do some of the things you did in a deficit, meaning you're not in a calorie deficit anymore. You probably don't have to do 19,000 steps anymore. You probably don't have to do, limit your carbs as much or, be as limited with your food choices. But you do have to do some of those healthy habits, right? You need to focus on protein. You need to get some steps. You need to keep lifting weights, all of these things. But when people come into maintenance with that, like, by diet mentality, I mean, I'm sure you guys know, but I just mean like that still restrictive mindset, like how you mentioned the high volume foods and like some of those thought processes that go with cutting, and they bring that into maintenance, they can really struggle because they feel like they're still cutting, right? But they're not seeing the results of that. And
we always say, like, you're basically cutting with 300 more calories is what you're doing.
Right.
Like,
And they're
you're
expecting
eating
cutting
the same-
results, but they're not.
Yeah. And so they expect a result in a weird way too, because they're like, I'm still doing the same practices that I was doing in a cut. And you're like, but you're just having like, half a scoop more of cottage cheese, or like,
Right.
2 more
Or
chicken
they're eating
breasts.
5 million veggies because they want to fill up. And I'm like, no, eat some actual rice, or, maybe some actual peanut butter or something to fill yourself up.
Instead of like reconstituted peanut butter powder. Yeah.
Right.
If you always feel like you're dieting and you're not losing weight, you're gonna have a really toxic relationship with a cut for sure.
Yeah.
And maintenance. Yeah.
And like at the heart of it, I know for you, like it is for us, it's just like you deserve more. Like you deserve better. Like you deserve to be proud of yourself. You deserve to love your body. Like all of the good things.
Yeah.
You deserve, right? So like getting out of that like minimum wage mindset, like
I love that. Yeah, that's huge. Well, that was awesome, you guys. I think we shared 5 or 6 great points about why people struggle with maintenance, and woven throughout there was also why maintenance is so important, right? So yeah, anyway, Natalie, Heidi, how do my listeners hear more about you guys?
Oh, well, you can come on over and hang out with us on Instagram at Butter Your Macros. We do have a podcast called The Butter Dish.
I love that name. It's so cute.
Listening along with Lindsay too, but also just, I think, just like you have a program, we have a program, but it's also like, do maintenance with a coach. If you've never been successful in maintenance, do not ditch your coach the second that you're done with a cut.
Oh my gosh, preach.
In fact,
yes.
Arguably, most women don't need a coach to cut. They need one for maintenance.
Right.
Like, if you're great at cutting calories, and you're not great at maintenance, like, here's an indicator to tell you, like, do it with somebody who can help you through it. Because part of maintenance, which is so hurtful, is it reveals a lot about yourself, right? That you maybe don't want to address because you're eating less, or you're just so laser focused on losing weight. And so sometimes the hardest work you'll ever do is in maintenance, and that is where the discipline really lends itself, not in a deficit, right? It's the restriction part is easy for us. A lot of times we're really good at like being mean to ourselves, but like to be generous with yourself and to live in abundance and to realize that you deserve more is in maintenance, and that is really hard for people. So come and figure all that out with any of us, right? We want that for you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for those parting words.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay, we'll see you later.
All right, guys. Okay, talk to you guys later.